Hello everybody, I'm Victoria and I am the online Cenotaph Collection Manager. I've been that for about 7 years, and more recently my role has expanded to include the inquiries that are received by collections of research at Auckland War Memorial Museum, Tāmaki, Paenga, Hira. And so I'm responsible for Cenotaph and the reading room. But today I'm going to be speaking to you about the 25 years of online Cenotaph, which is our sort of premier biographical database that is managed by Auckland Museum and has been managed by Auckland Museum since 1996. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the history of Auckland Museum as a war memorial, and then move into the 1990s and through to today on what we've been doing over the past 25 years. I just always think it's quite good to provide a bit of context. Auckland War Memorial Museum was established in 1852, but the war memorial that we know today opened in 1929 after the First World War, and the call for the public to be able to acknowledge their war dead and to commemorate veterans and provide a space for memorializing the First World War, as well as the New Zealand Wars and the South African Wars, which were also known as the Boer Wars. So we've been up on the Maunga Pokekawa since 1929. It's a pretty special space, and it includes, on the left you can see the Cenotaph, which is managed by Auckland Council, but we have a very strong relationship in that commemorative space. So I thought I'd just show you a couple of photos from it's a very short timeline from 1929 to the 1990s, where the museum was a physical space for commemoration, as well as research into war history and social history. So Auckland Museum is an encyclopedic collection, and included in that is our war history collection that was again established after the First World War. And so the building was created in 1929 and includes the World War I Hall of Memories. And during the 1960s, the museum was redeveloped again, and to include the World War II Hall of Memories, which you can see a photo on the left. And so the Hall of Memories in the museum relates to those who died in the Auckland province, so for the First World War and Second World War, and for South Africa. And then any post World War II, so Vietnam, Borneo, Malaya, any more recent conflicts like Palestine or Thailand, they will be included in completeness. So anyone who has died since the World War II will be included on our Hall of Memories as well. And oftentimes this is the only space that physically names those who have died in active service. So it's a very special space for us and the community. And so during that time, we had lots of commemorative events, and we also provided research into the war collections, and also research within our library, which we have a pretty solid World War I and sort of World War II history collections in our documentary heritage collection, as well as in our human history collections with our taonga and objects that relate to wars. And so this is just some photos of commemorative events that have happened, and they happen regularly every year. We provide space for veterans to be able to share and mourn and gather. And so there's some ephemera. Librarians love some ephemera from some of the commemorations that we've had over the past 80, 90 years. So in the 1990s, the museum started a bit of as described as a decade of revival, to enable us to maybe move into the 20th century, to allow much more human stories to be told. In the past, the displays within the museum were pretty encyclopedic. So we would show guns and uniforms and taonga without necessarily connecting them to a human story. And I think during the 1990s, especially with the influence of Dr. Rodney Wilson, that more human focus started to occur in the way that the collections were curated and described. And so this also reflected in the museum establishing the government establishing the Auckland War Memorial Museum Act in 1996. So that's sort of the date that is pretty significant in the museum's history, specifically around online cenotaph. And so it was that sort of time when people started to want to understand their connections to the First World War. I think it became quite popular, especially around sort of Australian and Australasian commemoration. More and more, you know, movies and books and publishing was really growing in terms of understanding our relationship to our nationalism and patriotism. And I think that the reinvigoration of our gallery spaces was all part of that. So level 2 has always been a space for commemoration. The Hall of Memories are held there, and they have always had displays of war collections. But in the early 90s, it was decided to refresh those galleries. And so Scars 1, which relates to the First World War, and Scars 2, World War, which relates to the Second World War, as well as some New Zealand Wars and South African War galleries, were starting to be redeveloped. And again, that sort of more narrative human side of research and curatorial approaches were taken. And so this is just, I've been loving going through a lot of our metros to see what people have reviewed about the galleries and the redevelopment at the museum. And so it's about emphasizing conflict through human lives rather than by amassing a collection of guns and knives. And I think that's really really the center of Online Cenotaph, or the Cenotaph Database as it was known, is that it was created to provide a sort of like a support of the galleries, so that if you wanted to know more information, then you could go to Online Cenotaph to research the names that you may have seen in the exhibitions. So I'm just showing you a photo of curator Rose Young, who I think Cenotaph Database was their baby. I've seen documentation around the establishment of a sort of multi media centre, which was what the Armory, some of you may remember the Armory, which was an information centre that came off Scars 2, and she wanted to be able to provide a database that listed all of Auckland's war dead, and that was the start of that idea. And the other photo on the right hand side is from the 1996 Anzac Day, and it sort of shows a very different, probably much more pared down commemorative event than we would see today. But it shows that, you know, there was, I think, beginning to be an upsurge in interest in the sort of Anzac Day spirit, and Online Cenotaph really helped to support that. So the Cenotaph Database was started by the library, woohoo librarians, and in sort of mid-1996, people started manually typing out the names that were listed in our rolls of honour for Auckland War Dead, and there were about 4 staff who were really integral into creating the database. This database was held only in the museum, so you could only search it in the Armory Information Centre itself. It wasn't on the intranet, it wasn't on the internet at that time. It was a really manual process, so people would be typing records one by one into the database. And for me trying to explain that to my staff today, I think it's sort of it surprises them that people had to do that. They would be typing from a paper form into a database. And by the time it was launched in December 1996, the database, I think, had reached 18,000 names. And then over the next few years, more and more names were added. But most of the time, they weren't added as a bulk. They were added one by one as somebody came in and wanted to research their family. They would give a name and that would be typed into the system. All of this based on using paper. It was sort of at the sort of start of emails and things like that for the museum. And so most of it was still very much a paper form was sent into the museum. As the years progressed, this is a photo of the Armory Design, which is the information centre that the Cenotaph was held in. As the years progressed, the database was expanded. So the database is a biographical database. It focuses on the war experience of individual service personnel. We don't aim to cover a person's entire life, but there will be, it's a document of their experience in war, and it's mainly focusing on their embarkation information that is publicly available. So it's not a biographical, like it doesn't encompass a person's entire life, but is a really good resource to be able to get a little bit more information about people. So here's some photos of the Armory, and it was a real draw card. I think in the first months, there were probably tens of thousands of people who visited. I think it was a very progressive approach at the time to be able to provide a space for people to come and research within the galleries that they were looking at objects in taonga in, and people really felt that they had a sense of ownership in online Cenotaph because they were providing information directly into the database, and they could see that information being updated and changed. And for museums who, and rightly so, are very very, not protective is not the right word, but very like conscious of being able to display correct information. It's a big step to be able to share that space with the communities, to be able to enable the public to contribute information to a resource that is managed by a museum. And we were doing this way before sort of Web 2.0 and way before user generated content could be added directly, but people could still add their stories and their knowledge about their whānau into the database. So it created a really strong sense of community, especially in a time on the cusp between that digital and manual sort of physical research that people were sort of navigating. And so it was in a really an effective space for people to come and share their information, and it had lots of resources. And we were able to make connections with members of the public to their histories, and I think that's really central to what Cenotaph is about. And so this is what for nerds out there, this is what the Cenotaph database looked like, and I think this was when it went on the intranet. So it meant that staff could add information maybe at a few computers around the museum at their desks instead of having to be out in Armory. And at this time it had 35,000 New Zealanders, and it focused at that time on those who had died. And so up until 2015, only people who had deceased were able to be put on the database. But as we've got now, anyone who is living personnel can be included on there, and we'd have a process that if somebody doesn't want their name up on there, they can just get in contact and we remove it from public view, and that's totally fine. But most of the information we get is publicly available, and it's minimal information. It's around their name, their rank, their units, their service. So it's not providing a lot of personal information, just focusing on their service. And so we've worked a lot with the RSA and other veterans associations. That's a really strong thread within the last 25 years. And the RSA are key to the success of online Cenotaph. They've provided us with funding, but they've also provided us with a lot of support in terms of getting their comrades to provide information to us, to be able to add information about their own service or about the service of their mates. And so we have always been incredibly lucky to have really positive relationships with our veterans associate, lots of different veterans associations, and again, it's that community focus, especially in the last few years as more and more associations wrap up. They sort of see us as a space where they can maybe provide information to us so that at least the information around their members is visible for in perpetuity, in effect. I should say that online Cenotaph, this is a screenshot of when it went on the internet, but I would just say that online Cenotaph covers the conflicts online Cenotaph is for people who have served on active service. So this is not for, it doesn't necessarily include people who were on territorial forces or things not deemed to service that they were not deemed to get military active service medals. And so that's what we normally go by, is using the Defence Force listing of who is eligible for receiving active service acknowledgement. And so it means that it ends up that our collection policy, in effect, is a little bit more focused than being able to say that we cover everything. So we do go from the South African wars up until today, but our strength is South African wars, First World War, Second World War, Vietnam, Malaya, Borneo, and Korea, probably up until the end of Vietnam. We've got a pretty solid collection. So I just thought I'd show you a screenshot of what it looked like in, I think, 2007, and what the online Cenotaph looks like today. So I think in maybe 2014, I did a presentation to the same group, to the Auckland Libraries, which I always love. The Auckland Libraries do such a great job in promoting our heritage, and we hadn't launched the website as of yet, but we received funding in 2012 from the Lotteries grant in relation to the first World War 100 project to develop online Cenotaph to enable the public to add information directly into the database. So as I sort of said, that it was very manual process, incredibly staff time and volunteer time intensive. We've always relied on volunteers to be able to enrich our database. We couldn't do it without our volunteers, but it sort of became a little bit untenable, especially moving into the digital age where there's so much information. And so the Ministry for Culture and Heritage viewed online Cenotaph as that sort of legacy product of the World War 100 project. And so we're really wanting us to redevelop and allow the public to add images, data, notes, and documents directly into the records. And over the past, as you can see, I think this is not completely up to date, but we've nearly got 100,000 notes and details data added to the database in the last 7 years. And then we've had over 50,000 images contributed. It was a massive peak at the beginning. And I think the World War 100 project really boosted the numbers of people uploading content. And it sort of tailed off. But that sort of reflects, I think, that a lot of families still hold the taonga from the First World War and maybe Second World War. But as we got into more of that professional service, so career onwards, then maybe there's fewer service personnel, so there's fewer things to add. That's my theory. Also, Auckland Museum is a war memorial, will always be a war memorial, and so we don't like have a target for added data because it's a long tail project. It's a project in perpetuity where we care for the information around our service personnel, hopefully forever. And so one thing that doesn't trail off is that the poppy's laid, so you can add a poppy for those personnel who have died. And every month we get at least 6,000 poppies laid. So that's still what we see that as a form of commemoration, and we can track that monthly, and that has never dwindled. So we can see the number of people adding information or laying poppies is a reflection of people's sort of care for the people that they're researching, or their own family members. So the other development with the redevelopment of the website is our ability to tell stories. And so in the Uncover More section, I think we probably now have more than 150 articles that we've written about our service personnel, and as well as on the front page, I don't know if it's still up, but about one of our mascots from the First World War. So we collaborate a lot with our human history colleagues, especially Gail Romano, who does an amazing job writing up about objects in our collection that relate to war service. A lot of our focus is on increasing our understanding of women service personnel, our Pacific and Māori personnel, maybe people that we don't necessarily see a lot in the mainstream publications, and raising up the stories and identifying people that we can tell more in-depth personal stories, which is always like such a privilege to be able to do that. Another part of the World War 100 development was the opening of Paenga Memorial Discovery Centre. So the Armory was closed and Paenga was opened, and it's a space for people to come and do research. And at the moment, it's a little bit quiet because of COVID, but it's generally has been in the past a volunteer-run space where our volunteers will be to provide research for people. But we're sort of in a little bit of a transitional phase with that. So we're trying to figure out how we make it interesting for our volunteers when we have fewer visitors on site. So I thought I'd show you a record, which this is my great-grandfather, Henry William Inslee. And I was wanting to point out that on the record, you can see contributions made by myself and I think my mum. And if you add information directly into the record, your relationship with that person is listed, as well as your first name and the date that you add in information and the source that you got that information from. We don't generally publish second names because of just privacy. And if people challenge contributions, we will always, review and research, but we don't tend to review everything that's added. It's unmoderated, mainly because I have a team of myself and 2 other people, and some of the content is just unverifiable. We would not be able to tell you if the person was a great I don't know, trombonist or something like, could play the piano well. I can't verify that. So we don't tend to do that. It's also, we do that because 1, staff time, and 2, we don't want to whakaiti our users. We accept that when people add content, generally, I'd say 99% of the time, they do it from a really good place. They want to tell the stories of their person that they're researching or their whānau, and that information is important to them. And so we leave it as it is. As I said, there is review. We can review the content, and we're always happy to. And we're always happy to help people if they can't add content directly into the records themselves. We normally manage around 150 to 200 inquiries a month. Many of them are from veterans and more elderly users who are not au fait with using the computers, and that's all good. They can contact us directly and we can do it on their behalf. And that's a really important part of the museum's role as a war memorial, is that we have luckily enough to continue to have investment in having staff to be able to actually manage this, because we, I think, receive maybe 150,000 page views a month. So it's a pretty solidly used resource. The light in this office has turned off because I have not moved. Do I need to turn it on again? Yep, it's turned back on. Look at that. We're a sustainable organization. So the other thing that we do is we create some saved searches for people, so popular searches. We collaborate. I mean, I think collaboration is the key to online Cenotaph. We couldn't be anywhere without our researchers. And that includes people like Pat Clarkson, who's done lots of research into identifying medical practitioners from the First World War. And so we're able to list all the people who she's been able to identify, and it sort of enables us to thank her for the work that she's done. And we've done that with other resources as well. And so if there are people that you guys know and they've got research in a very usable spreadsheet, please let us know. We're always happy to talk to people about contributing data in a sort of a bulk way instead of people adding it manually in the front end. Thought I'd just show you some examples of images that people have uploaded. So, you know, more than 50,000 images have been provided to us, and most of them are from personal collections, and we also have some super users who contribute images from openly licensed open source images from around lots of different collections. And so there are people working tirelessly, adding information all the time, and again, very lucky to be able to get people to work with people who are really interested in enriching the database. I think I said that we've now got the ability to tell stories and put profiles up on Cenotaph. And in the last couple of years, we've been able to interview a few veterans, and it is a really amazing opportunity for us to be able to talk to people who maybe feel like they haven't previously had an outlet or to share their stories. And as a result, we've had some really great feedback about it, especially with Peter Gallagher, who's on the right. He provided us with 400 images of his time in Malaya, and we have virtually no content in our collection relating to the Malayan conflict. And so having 400 colour photographs of his service, even just in Cenotaph, has meant that we've been able to increase our understanding of that conflict and what it was like to be in sort of that sort of jungle conflict. And the photo on the bottom is him and I think two other of his mates from the Rotorua area reading newspapers in the Malayan jungle. The other person on the left is Murray Watane, and if any of you ever come to our commemorative events at the museum, he's often the person to read the Ode in Te Reo Māori, and he served in Malaya and in Vietnam, and is a really amazing person to talk to, and you know, it's just really lovely to be able to sort of be able to tell personal stories of those who are entering into their 80s and provide an outlet for them to be able to share their experiences. So over the COVID period, as you all know, we've been in lockdown for a good part of 2 years, and so during that time we were able to complete a number of transcription projects. So a former colleague, Dan, worked in Wellington for nearly 18 months imaging content from Archives New Zealand, and I think he imaged, as well as Archives New Zealand had imaged some of the series, about 28,000 pages were available for us to transcribe. And so we worked with our 13 visitor hosts, full-time visitor hosts, who would normally be out on the floor walking around providing manaki to our museum visitors. They were able to transcribe nearly 18,000 pages alongside some of our volunteers who've worked from home. So in the last 2 years, despite it being a really hard time, I think I would say for most people, Online Cenotaph has been able to provide really valuable opportunities for our staff, as well as increase the numbers of records that we've been able to put online. We've had a significant increase in our Korean War lists, both Army and Navy. At J-Force, we've been able to identify those records because they sort of came at the end of World War II in the nominal rolls, and were well, actually probably misidentified by us as being World War II when they were J-Force, and then also Malaya and Borneo conflicts. And so this has meant that we've been able to increase our records in the last year and a half by 11,000. And it also means that forces like Air Force and Navy and Merchant Navy have been increased as well. So it's major gaps have started to being filled. And we felt really lucky that we were able to work with our visitor hosts and our volunteers to do this work. We also, over the summertime, had a transcription project kindly funded by the C&L Gregory Trust to transcribe 11,000 Merchant Navy cards. The Merchant Navy is the fourth force of the Defence Force, and has sort of been under-researched and maybe underrepresented in New Zealand's war story. They were civilians, so they didn't enlist, but they served in pretty intense spaces and over, transporting food and people to the war during World War II. And so we had Hebe and Alicia Ward doing work on transcribing that card. You can see the transcription is pretty intense. It's in pencil, it's very cursive, it's very hard to read. And they were able to, in 8 weeks, able to transcribe 3,000 cards. So you can see how hard going that collection is. But I think once we are able to transcribe all of those names, then it will really increase our understanding of the Merchant Navy service for further research. And that's sort of what we love to do, is be able to increase the research into the lesser known subjects. So I thought I'd just show you what transcription means. I think most of you probably know it's people tirelessly typing out lists. Sometimes they're handwritten, sometimes they're typed, and then we're able to match it to online Cenotaph so that we can enrich the records that exist today. And it's a lot of work, and we have some really amazing volunteers who have committed a huge amount of their own personal time to be able to allow us to create new records. So I always want to acknowledge their work as well as the work of paid staff. So in 2021, I just thought that I would give you an overview. I probably need to update that. I'll do this after Anzac Day. That we hit 255,000 online Cenotaph records. And when I first started, I think we were on 125,000 records. So been there since 2014. So we've been tracking along, and we've had 2,600 hours of transcription during 2021. So we really were able to sort of power through a lot of our transcription project. And I'm really proud of the team that I've worked with, especially being able to provide 13 full-time staff work for over 4 months. So yeah, I'm always proud of my team. And as you can see, we receive about 2,500 inquiries a year. Some of the inquiries might be very simple questions or changes to a name or adding a conflict, and others is doing quite deep research for people into unraveling a military service record or something else like that. So also direct people to Cenotaph to have a look. And sometimes in the past we've had people offer 1 or 2 images or things to the collections that maybe we aren't able to acquire, and then at least we have an outlet for people to be able to put a copy of that image on Cenotaph. So it's always an option for people as well, to feel like they're able to actually do something if we aren't able to accommodate their donations. Because this year is the 25th anniversary of online Cenotaph, we've put up a donations page for people if they're wanting to provide a little bit of koha for us to continue to tell the stories. This will help us to tell and interview our veterans. And yeah, I just thought that I'd put that up there. No pressure to donate at all. I've also created a timeline for the 25th anniversary, and it goes right back to Pokekawa. So it covers a very long period of time, but I just thought that it's a really good resource for you to understand the context of what we're working through. Yeah.